Men are struggling in almost every way imaginable. Suicide, addiction, homelessness, a general sense of being lost in today's society, and they are often criticized. The purpose of this podcast is for men to understand their struggles and understand solutions. The man I'm joined by today is a financial coach, an investment manager, and a former pastor of 20 years. He's here today to share his deep knowledge of the struggles of men, how finding men's groups changed his life, and working in prison ministry changed his perspective. Today I'm joined by David Mackenzie, so he can share solutions for men. All right, so I'm here with David Mackenzie. How you doing, David?
Good, Maddie. I'm doing well. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you here. We've known each other for a little while.
Yeah.
You are a financial coach.
I am.
You happen to be my financial coach. You help people make more money, properly protect themselves, become financially free, and get out of debt.
Isn't that a mouthful?
That's a mouthful.
No, I love it. Never thought I'd be there, but here I am.
Here you are.
Yeah, I've had a few careers.
Okay. You were a pastor for 20 years, right?
I was. I studied for a long time. Was out west, Alberta, Manitoba, Nova Scotia, in the east, and then ended up in pastoral ministry on PEI for about 20 years.
Wow.
Most of it in a small country church, which I loved. I loved the role. I loved the people. But things change, and I moved on.
Okay, that's interesting. So we've known each other for a little while, and your past is not really something we've talked about. So I'm happy to have you here today. And a big reason why we wanted to have this chat, and we've been chatting a little bit, is you're very involved in some men's groups, and that's why I wanted to have this conversation today, and we kind of connected because this is something that you've been into for a while, and it's the meaning of this podcast. So I guess, what have you been into in terms of men's groups, and what brought you there?
Well, if I go back into my church life, my ministry, my pastoral world, it was hit and miss. I might have been involved in some very basic stuff, but actually through the work I do, I encountered a group called the Band of Brothers, and it was a speaker that at a business meeting that just shared that he shared his faith, actually, and one thing led to another. He was inviting people to this group called the Band of Brothers. So actually a guy I work with decided he was going to go, and I felt a little protective of him because he was, from a faith perspective, he was kind of new to the faith, and I felt like, he's kind of a new guy. I don't want him getting into something that, might harm him in some way. So that was kind of the initial thought about going. But so I signed up. He signed up before I did, and then I did, and then we went off to Ontario to a weekend. And I got to tell you, I never expected that it would change my life the way it did, because this was a new kind of men's group. And the best way to describe it, Matt,
do you mind just pulling this just a little bit closer? Sorry, I didn't cut you out there, but
the best way to describe it, I think, Matt, is it was very raw. It was the kind of stuff that men don't tend to talk about. Men tend to be they can be closed. I know that I have been in the past. It's kind of the way I grew up. We don't get too intimate in our deep thoughts and that sort of thing. Great family, but it's just the way it was. So when guys were getting up, sharing some of their stories and some of their struggles, personally, whether it's, relationships, sexually, or in just some of the background that they were coming out of, in terms of struggles with their fathers, even their mothers, struggles with, family dynamics, and we're sharing some very, personal things. And of course, we say at the Band of Brothers, what happens there stays there. So I'm not going to get into details, but just for people to know, that, this is a place, at least for me, it was a place where I could sit and listen to start. Eventually, it became a part of it, and was encouraging people to open up as I did. But at the beginning, it was just like, wow, I don't know if I can go here. But it like I say, it changed me. It really did. I began to see that some of the things I was holding inside were not good. It wasn't going to make me the man I needed to be, in terms of relating to. I have 3 daughters.
Right.
Girls tend to like talk more than boys do. At least that was my experience. And so you got to learn to talk. They're not all the same, but so I know I would shut down, when things got a little too deep. Yeah, for sure.
So there was like kind of a closed door. It went to a certain point, and it's like not going any further than that, almost.
Yeah, and I don't think of myself as being this really cut off, disconnected person. It's just that with the deep stuff of life and the kind of thoughts you might harbor in your head, kind of thing, you think it's not safe to bring that stuff up here. In most situations, it probably isn't. But here was a group of men who were coming from various backgrounds. Some of them very difficult. Some of them very, very. Coming out of actually abusive backgrounds, and then some guys just coming out of situations that, you consider normal, growing up years, with, average families that didn't have, a lot of trouble,
yeah,
but still harboring some things within them that they felt like, I can't share that stuff here. It's too personal. It's too deep.
Would you say that was the first time that you seen men open up in that way?
The short answer is yes. But let me qualify that a little bit. When I was in seminary, I actually, I'm saying 2 things here. When I was in seminary, I actually took a diploma in prison ministry. I was studying at Acadia Divinity College, and we used to go up to Spring Hill Penitentiary. I had to spend 200 hours inside the penitentiary, and as part of the diploma.
Learned a lot there.
Well, I did, and I became a part of this thing called they called it a Kairos marathon group. Marathon meaning you're going to sit there for hours and hours. And, sometimes it takes a long time for people just to kind of get to the place where they're going to share something, right?
So they volunteer to do that? Like
they do. It was in the chapel at the penitentiary. And you would sit in a circle. There would be probably half the people would be people from the outside and half would be inmates from the prison. And that make a good combination. So sometimes it would be inmates who would share, and sometimes it was people from the outside. We're not that different. One of my professors used to say, we're more alike than we are different.
Yes.
And he was a guy that spent a lot of time with these guys. He wrote a book or 2 about his experiences. So I guess the reality is I probably learned more there to begin with about the opportunity to open up and begin to share things that are difficult to share. You think people are going to judge you, and some in the wrong contexts, people are going to judge you.
Yeah,
because they're not ready to share. They're not ready to open up, and you have to be careful with that. You really do. You don't just. As the scripture says, you don't put your pearls before swine. People that are going to be irresponsible with your information.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
You don't do that.
Yeah.
So in the context of that, they called it a kairos marathon because the word kairos in the Greek means it's a moment in time when something significant happens. And so there was times when people would open up and begin to see that there are people out there that maybe are at least willing to understand me and why I did the things I did, And of course, we were listening to people that in some cases were in for murder, or had broken the law in some significant way to get more than 2 years in jail, right? Some very sad stories, very difficult stories, and I remember this one guy. He was sitting there. He had his hood up, which is a sign I don't want to communicate. I'm closed off,
Yeah.
And one of my professor that I went there with, he said to me later, he said, that I don't think that guy could read. And his story was, without, nobody, I don't even know the guy, but his story was that he would break and enter a lot. And he said to us, the thing about breaking and entering, he said, I could do it and I could get away with it. Obviously he didn't ultimately, but he could do it well. But it was kind of, I'm proving myself, right? Because I don't think I have what it takes in life. And actually that's a line from the Band of Brothers. We always say, you have what it takes, but a lot of us don't realize it. And so here was a young guy in prison for doing something that he thought he could do well at, which is actually breaking the law, and sitting there, with his hood up, kind of shut down, eventually sharing something that I learned later from my professor, that it was just his way of trying to say, I do have what it takes.
I'm competent. I can do this. I'm capable.
Yeah, I'm competent in this area, even though it's not a good thing, right? So just to kind of bring the two together, when I think about it now, that's a time in my life when I really I never got involved in prison ministry other than that time of learning. And it has served me well. It really has. It was the time when I realized, I'm not a whole lot different, but for the grace of God, I could be in the same place, kind of thing. Anyway, so when I went to the Band of Brothers, I never really connected the two per se, but this was I'm not inside a prison. I'm not there just listening to inmates and other people talk. I'm with a bunch of guys that are kind of like me, although when you sit with them, you don't realize that maybe this guy had a father who beat him or, just regular guys that are in business. They have jobs, good careers, that sort of thing, that have struggles that you don't see until you give people an opportunity to open up a little bit in a safe environment.
Right. I think what you said about the, just going back a little bit, what you said about the realizing that you are no different than the inmates. I think that's an important lesson, like the humbleness of we're all the same thing. We all, like you said, we all have more in common than we don't. And I think oftentimes, it's just kind of a thought I had, we think of someone else oh, they're different than me because they're in prison, or they're different than me for XYZ reason.
Yeah.
Or even if it's a different way where it's maybe it's a high business person. They're different than me for some reason.
I'm going to tell you a story. I'll try to make this quick because I know we don't have a lot of time. But I remember hearing this story. It's not, it's just a story I read, and it's true though. This was a young guy who was homeless. He was, he didn't have a family. He ended up on the streets, and eventually he killed someone. I don't know the details of that, but it was probably out of self-protection or something. But so he ended up on death row. This is in the U.S. And when he got to prison, he was so just a shell of a person. And he curled up in a fetal position on the floor of the cell he was living in, and dirty and everything else. And there was a guy who befriended him. And this guy was a guard. He happened to be a man of faith. And he would come in, and he just started to sort of visit the guy. And he would pray with him, or at least pray over him in the beginning. And eventually he started reading some scripture and that sort of thing. And one day he came into the guy's room, into his cell, and everything was cleaned up. He was sitting upright. He was all clean and so on. And they became really good friends. Somehow the guy's life changed just because someone had reached into his life and cared for him, right? And spiritually, I mean, I think he kind of awakened to God. But here's the thing. He was on death row. And there was still this date coming to him where they were going to take his life. And so a long story short was he's on the last day of his life. They're preparing him for his execution. And he, he's tired, because who wouldn't be if you're thinking about you're going to kill you in a few hours. And they gave him his last meal. And so he's laying there. And the friend of his came in. And he could see that the guy was exhausted. He was laying down. He pulled the blanket over him. And before he left the room, he just knelt over and he kissed him on his forehead and he left. Or as he was leaving, the inmate said to his friend, he said, isn't it sad that you come to the last day of your life and you get kissed and tucked in for the first time? So when I say, we're more alike than we are different, that story really resonates with me. I wasn't that guy. I wasn't homeless. I wasn't someone who was abandoned. I wasn't someone who, for whatever reason, I took somebody else's life and ended up on death row. But I'm a guy who grew up with a good father and mother. We had our issues, and everything wasn't perfect by any means. And in many ways, I could shut down. Because, I don't know, for whatever reason. But I had people who, actually, when my mom died, I wrote a poem about her, kissing me and tucking me in at night kind of thing, right? So, we all need that. We all need that guardianship, the guardians of our soul kind of thing. And when we don't have it, as much as we, can go through life and try to blame people, the truth of the matter is that if we don't have it, it's going to affect us. And isn't it sad that someone would have to go through life and end up on the last day of their life before they are ever kissed and tucked in? I mean,
right.
To me, that's incredible. But it happens. And when I hear stories of men who haven't had some of the experiences, and some people have had better experiences than I have, we're all kind of all over the map. But the reality is, and this is something that, a guy I pay a lot of attention to now. He's just came out with a new book that I'm about to read, and he says there's 3 intrinsics in life. There's a search for meaning, there's a search for intimacy, and a search for destiny or progress. We all need to move forward. And I held a lot of that stuff in my head for years. But until you realize that those are intrinsic to everybody. We're no different. I'm no different from the guy that ends up in prison or on death row who was searching for meaning, searching for intimacy, and searching for some way to move his life forward. It's true, and so I guess I'm grateful for the fact that where my life is going. Which, I've had to make some decisions and that have affected that. But I've had a lot of good mentors and a lot of good support and a lot of good guardianship of my soul too, especially with parents and some friends along the way. But anyway.
Well, I think that's a profound story. And I know we have a few minutes left, and this has been really great. What would you say, this Band of Brothers is a good example, but I often think about in society today, and, a lot of this stuff gets politicized and stuff, but there's kind of a push for men to be more vulnerable.
There is.
And, I kind of have a bone to pick with that from what I've learned. But I really do think, the thing that's missing is that you need to actually do it with other men. And I'd be curious of your opinion on that, because I kind of believe there's a push for men to be more vulnerable, but what it ends up kind of the message being is be less masculine completely and kind of be more feminine. But I just think I know this is kind of a scattered thought process, but I think that being with men that you trust is ultimately what's missing, and sharing with other men that you trust. I think that is what's missing.
I think that's a good train of thought, actually. And here's some of my thoughts at this point on it. When I went to this particular Band of Brothers group, we don't necessarily call it a retreat. It's more of an advance. Think of themselves as moving forward. And anyway, I realized quite significantly that it needed to be just men.
Yes.
In order for what happened to happen.
Yeah.
And I'm still convinced of that. There's a guy I listen to a lot, and he's a very, he's a deep spiritual guy and has a real man of faith. I mean, he proclaims Christ and all of that, but he does a lot of business work and coaching and that, and he does masterminds with people who have, wealthy people. And actually at this point they're all men, and I don't know where it's going to go in the future for him, but he says I've only done this with men, and part of the thing that he deals with, because one of the focuses he takes is on character, and he says, like, some of these people they're so successful, there's no question about their success, in terms particularly financially. But there may be questions about other areas of their lives, like relationships, like their character related to issues in life that we all know.
Social, emotional, spiritual kind of stuff.
Yeah, all of that. And the one thing he said was, a lot of these guys, maybe not all of them, but a lot of these guys are at a place where it's not a matter of can I be successful in my life in terms of what a lot of the world measures as success, but it's a question of, can I keep it? Am I going to be able to maintain this? Because as we all know, I think, our character flaws can become huge cracks that can open up a whole world of demise and can bring us down. Yeah. And so a lot of them are coming into this and saying, I want to hear what you have to say. I want to hear maybe some of your perspective on faith and so on, because if I don't pay attention to that stuff, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to maintain what I've gained in life, sort of thing. So right. I'm not sure how we diverted off to that, Matt, but
talking about like men in particular, like together is important.
Yeah, for sure. At this point in my life, I'm saying that quite clearly. I think there's a place. My wife and a couple of my daughters have been off to some. It's kind of a mirror image of the Band of Brothers, only it's for women. It's called Hearts of Beauty. And they do their thing and we do ours, kind of thing. And I think it's important for them to be there with just women because of a lot of women's issues and the way they need to talk to each other. And it's the same for men. So at this point, I really think it's important to do that. When you talk about vulnerability and I'm thinking of John Eldridge. He's another mentor of mine. He's a deep man of faith. He does these boot camps for men, kind of thing, and he and his wife, does a thing for women. But he says, men, in his view, men have been emasculated. Yeah. They've kind of had their masculinity ripped out, and particularly when it comes to the church. No, I'm not anti-church. I love the church. I'm at a place where I'm trying to figure out. That's a long story. I'm trying to figure out how to relate to it and how to maybe influence it in a good way, and be influenced by it in ways that maybe I don't know, but. Over the years, in his view, and I think he's right, men have been just asked to be a nice guy. And that's not what it's all right to be nice, be polite, have all those good manners and everything. But men want more than that. They want adventure. They want to, he's got some lines that he uses in the Band of Brothers, like, men are sort of designed to rescue the beauty. Yeah. Someone in life that they can support and be a hero to, kind of thing, and also to live an adventurous life, not just a quiet, subdued, you're a nice guy, you've turned around and now you're going to sit in a pew somewhere and just be nice to people. No, there's a lot more to a man than that, for sure. Yeah. And I could go on, but I mean, I just think he says it well when he says that, men have been emasculated, and it's not, I think we do have a feminine side, and it's there for a reason, but that's not the whole story. Yeah. We're men for a reason. Yeah. And I know that's a big topic today, but
yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, I agree with everything you just said there. I'm reading this book called it's called He, Understanding Masculine Psychology. Okay. It's very interesting. Wow. But one of the things it says in it is every man has an inner feminine.
Right.
So the inner feminine is what you connect to. It's your source of creativity. It's your source of vision. It's your source of beauty in life.
Right.
And when a man expresses his inner feminine in the outward world,
right,
that's when he starts to get into trouble. He becomes moody and kind of just expressing his feminine. It's like there's an imbalance there. I know this is kind of deeper concepts for people listening, but
yeah,
they do need to connect to their inner feminine, but in an inner way, and that's through creating and through vision and be connected to it.
Right.
But I think that's when I read that, I'm like, oh, that's kind of the imbalance I see in the world a lot. It's there's a push for men to be more outwardly feminine.
Right.
Right. It seems like, but really, it's this misunderstanding where it's they do need to connect to the inner feminine. That's their source of adventure and I want to build something. I have a vision. I'm excited. All this stuff, adventure in life. But that's the inner world. The masculine frame is still there that they're holding, right? And I think when men get together and talk to each other, why it works is because they're still in their masculine, right? And there's still each man there can understand from a masculine point of view.
And I think that the same thing is true in reverse for women. Yes. I really do.
Yeah.
I'll tell you why I say that with even more confidence is I listen to, I've done quite a lot of work on me in relation to Darren Hardy. He's a success mentor. And I went through this course and he was saying, if he was talking about emotional intelligence, which is a big thing today, and it's true for both men and women. We all need emotional intelligence. You see some people, they're very skilled at what they do, but they can't relate to people.
Yeah.
and their emotional intelligence level, their IQ may be really high, but their EQ is really low. Mm-hmm. Anyway, long story short, in the course of talking about all that, he said, you know what? Naturally, women have a higher level of EQ, of emotional intelligence. That's just kind of where we're at in society.
Yeah.
And it's not that they have it all, but the problem is sometimes with women is that, actually, before I say this, let me say this. He said, go out and get yourself some badass women if you want to build a business, because they might help you to relate to people a lot better.
Yes.
But he said, he also looked at the women in the room and he said, don't try to be a man. Because you don't have to, you may be competing in a man's world, but don't do it by trying to be a man. Bring what you have, what you already have, maybe a higher level of emotional intelligence to relate to the man's world, and you're going to probably be as successful or more. And good for them if they can be.
It's like a blind spot, right? It's like
it is.
It could be like the men's blind spot. It's like.
Yeah. So I think what you're saying is true. I haven't pursued it in that regard, very far, but I think that's true. We are made to be who we are. In my view, we're made to be who we are for a reason. But we bring some of each other to the table for a reason. But we don't have to like men don't have to be women, and women don't have to be men in order to. I mean, I know it's different socially. I know it's different maybe politically, but the reality of the essence of who we are, I think there's something that we all bring to the table. And I think that's what we're discussing is how do we get really in touch with that? People have struggles, and a lot of the struggles seem to be related to, well, I feel like I have to be this or I have to be that. But what is it? Who am I supposed to be? What is my true identity? Right?
Right.
So,
For sure.
Yeah.
Well, we do have to stop, unfortunately. This has been a really great conversation.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
I guess for people listening, what are some books or even groups? I mean, we'll start with books. What can people do if they say there's some guys listening that want to start down this path? Is there anything you would recommend?
Sorry. That's a great question. I don't know if I have the names off the top of my head. Just from a human standpoint, not particular to men, but I just thought of this book, and I put it on a post the other day. It was a book called Safe People, written by Henry Cloud and John Townsend. And it, like I say, it's not a men's book or a women's book. It's just a human book. But, they talk about how, they go into a lot more depth on this, but they say there's people who are unsafe because they're either critical, they're abandoners, or they're irresponsible. Like, Maddie, if you were to share something deep with me and you don't want the whole world to know, and I go out and tell the world, being irresponsible with that is I'm not a safe person. So that's just one example. But and anyway, just from being a human standpoint, I think that book really helped me a lot. I've listened to, when you talk about vulnerability, Brené Brown comes to mind. She did a TED talk on vulnerability and shame. It went viral and it put her on the map, kind of thing. And she's done a lot with that since. But yeah, if you were to Google Brené Brown TED Talk vulnerability, it's going to come up. And she's a social scientist, so she did a lot of research on this stuff. But it was a surprise to her that, and again, I'm not talking specific to men or women. I'm just talking from a human perspective. Because women struggle too,
of course,
right?
Yeah, of course.
In terms of vulnerability, and when going back to a few moments ago when we're our conversation, who am I and what characteristics or what criteria do I bring to the table as a man or as a woman, and how do I flesh that out in real time, and how do I separate that to actually expose more of it to people I feel safe with, whether it's in the case of women with women, men with men, kind of thing. And I think the two have some real separations there that need to be. There's probably some other books. I'm just drawing a blank here right now, but
we can talk about it, and I'll just put it in the description. I'll put those two things in the description, and then if there's any books come to mind, when it comes out, you guys can just check the description, and there'll be some more titles there.
Just from those two things, I think a lot of times people they don't feel safe. They don't. I'm in the financial world, and the two things I talk to people about investments is safety of their money and performance. Safety and performance. And I think that's true in relationships. I think we all want a certain level of safety because we don't want people abandoning us. We don't need more people abandoning us. We don't need more people being irresponsible with the truths that we're trying to get out. Right, and we don't need people being critical of us, just judging us, so that we never get a chance to open up. right? I just thought of another book. It's called Maybe You Need to Talk to Someone. And again, it's not so much about men or women. There's a lady called Lori Gottlieb. She wrote this book called Maybe You Need to Talk to Someone. And again, it's not so much, it's not a man or woman thing, but which I know I'm not being very specific on this, but her and another therapist have a podcast called Dear Therapist, and they actually take literal questions that people would send in, I'm struggling with this or that, and then they actually have that person come online and they talk to them on the podcast about their situation. Obviously, the person is giving them permission to talk about it, and then they kind of walk them through and offer psychotherapy.
Wow.
It's pretty cool. I've listened to it a few times, and but again, specific to men, we'll have to have another conversation maybe about some of the writings. And
I think we will.
What's
I think
helpful.
we could talk for a long time.
We'll
definitely do this again sometime. But I want to say thank you so much for coming on, David, and
You're
sharing
very
this
welcome.
stuff today.
You're welcome, man. I appreciate what you're doing.
Thank you.
All right.